Merry Christmas, everybody, and as usual for the whole month of December, I'm going to be reviewing some Christmas movies, and this year, I'm going to be tackling some of the movies that you might not immediately associate with Christmas. You know, those movies where somebody brings it up and you're like, oh yeah, I guess that is technically a Christmas movie. And those are the types of movies I'm going to be reviewing this month, starting with what's probably the most overtly Christmassy of all the movies I'm going to review this month. Home Alone. So Home Alone came out in 1990, was not directed by John Hughes. I always thought that John Hughes wrote and directed this movie because it just has his fingerprints all over it, but no, this is directed by Chris Columbus, who's had, you know, a pretty good track record, especially in his earlier years of making good movies, and Home Alone is no exception. Home Alone is a great film, but what surprised me watching it this time is just how much Christmas iconography and Christmas feeling is in this movie, because for me, I never really associated this movie with the holidays. I know a lot of people, especially people around my age or a little older, are really obsessed with Home Alone, that it's their Christmas movie. They watch it every year. It's a tradition. But for me, Home Alone never really was that. I mean, of course, I watched it as a kid. I watched it a bunch of times, but I never really associated it with the holidays. I'd watch it in like July or March or just any time because it's a great movie no matter what time of year you watch it in. It's hilarious. But because of that, I never really thought about how it worked as a Christmas movie and whether or not it should be considered a Christmas movie. And after watching this again, I can see now why so many people associate it with Christmas, because it is a Christmas story. It's a Christmas fantasy. This story really does have all the hallmarks of a Christmas classic, and I gotta give John Hughes all the credit for this because it's a Christmas wish movie. It's about a bratty kid, doesn't appreciate his family, wishes that he was alone and everybody would disappear, and then he gets his wish, and now he has to grow from that. He has to grow beyond his bratty immaturity and become something more. And it's really not that different from the Grinch or Scrooge or George Bailey's story arcs in their respective stories, because it uses the magic and the good feeling of the holidays to affect a change in a person's soul. And just because it's about a kid in this instance doesn't make it any less impactful or important. So let's get into it. So this story is about Kevin, played by Macaulay Culkin. And I don't remember if this was the film that gave him his big break, but it was definitely the film that propelled him into superstardom. It made him a household name. Everybody knew who this kid was after Home Alone. It was huge for him. And for good reason. Culkin does a great job here as Kevin. He nails every aspect of his character here, starting with the bratty little twerp in the beginning who can't do anything for himself. He's dependent entirely on his siblings or his parents to do everything for him, and he just generally causes problems. He doesn't quite fit in the family dynamic when everyone's packing or having dinner, and you do feel bad for him. And as a kid, I'm sure I identified a lot more with Kevin's plight, but as an adult now, I am starting to see it a little more from the parents' perspective, where yeah, maybe Kevin needs to grow up a little bit. Maybe he needs to mature. He needs to do some things for himself, be a little more independent. And with the help of a little bit of Christmas magic, and actually it's more like Final Destination magic, really, when you see the storm happen and the power blows and all the alarm clocks reset. It does look a little bit more like a death omen than a Santa Claus omen, but because of that, everybody slept in a little too late, so now they're scrambling to get to the airport in time, you know, wrangle up all the kids, and unfortunately Kevin gets left behind and he wakes up much later than everybody else. I don't know how he was able to sleep in through all that ruckus of people running around, but he managed it. And when he comes downstairs, there's nobody home. And not only did they leave, but they are already on the plane flying to Paris by the time the parents realize they forgot Kevin. And this is where the fun and games portion of the movie happens, because you can't have a premise like this without having the requisite montage of Kevin eating junk food, watching dark and disturbing classic film noir movies. Which, I don't know, even as a kid I was like, you know, these film noir movies aren't really that violent or disturbing or graphic. I don't really know why Kevin was so scared of them. And is it just me, or do you really want to see more of that movie, The Angels with Filthy Souls? That just looks so entertaining, and they captured the film noir look of Angels with Dirty Faces, which I'm pretty sure that's the film that it's referencing, but I just think that'd be so cool. I'd love to see it. But while Kevin's having the time of his life doing whatever he wants, his mom, played by Catherine O'Hara, is desperate to get back to her son. And this is what really makes the movie for me, because this movie won't work unless you can buy into the panic and desperation that Catherine O'Hara has when she realizes that she left her 8-year-old son home alone as her and her family went off to another continent. That's not something to be taken lightly, and thankfully this movie addresses that in some of the best dialogue and delivery I've seen out of Catherine O'Hara. She kills it in this role, and you believe that she is trying everything she can to get home to her son as fast as possible. This is going to be a weird comparison, but bear with me. I view the Home Alone franchise in a lot of the same way I view the Terminator franchise, and here's why. The premise that each of these films have that drives the story. In Home Alone, it's a situation where a kid is left home alone while the rest of the family goes off on vacation. And in Terminator, it's a little more complex, but it's the idea that a machine from the future came back to kill the mother of its enemy, and a resistance fighter also came back to stop him. But in the future, everything's been destroyed, so there's no return trip, nobody else comes through. It's just Kyle Reese and the Terminator locked in conflict. And the problem is that with every sequel that each of these franchises pumps out, it reduces the impact of that original movie. In the case of Home Alone, how many times can the parents leave a kid alone before you realize that they're just probably bad parents? And if you start thinking that, all the stakes and emotion that the movie's trying to achieve is dead. And in the same way, how many Terminators and Protectors can be sent back in time to protect the Connor family before the suspension of disbelief gets stretched enough and you're like, well, they just have endless robots and endless protectors and nothing really matters. There's no urgency and there's no stakes like we had in that first movie where it was just the Terminator and Kyle, and they were the only ones that could ever achieve time travel. Well, that was a tangent and a half, but focusing back up, this story really does work best when you disregard all the sequels and reboots and anything else Disney has coming down the pipeline with more Home Alone content, because the biggest success of this film is buying into the premise that this family could leave their kid home alone and they're not terrible parents. And that's the key. These parents clearly care about their son, and the mom is desperately trying to get back to him, trying every avenue. She's having her own little planes, trains, and automobiles experience with John Candy, but that really is the core of this story, and I'm so impressed at how they pulled that off. But now let's talk about the Wet Bandits. And as a kid, these were my favorite characters. I didn't really care that they were the bad guys. They were hilarious, and I loved watching them get hurt. But what I didn't really notice as a kid was just how funny they are before all the slapstick happens. Because all the slapstick really is just delegated to the third act. That's when everything really comes together. But throughout the whole movie, these guys are hilarious, and the bantering back and forth, the bickering, the arguing is just so great. It feels so natural, even though they're giving pretty over-the-top performances. You believe that they are the live-action versions of Jasper and Horace from 101 Dalmatians, but somehow even more funny. And I have to give special credit to Joe Pesci as Harry, because after seeing him in Goodfellas and pretty much every other role he's ever taken on, the fact that he got through this movie without dropping any profanity that would have elevated this movie to an R rating in a second is something to be applauded. And it's even funnier knowing that when he's muttering to himself under his breath, you know, his little that's Joe Pesci trying his hardest not to swear in this family-friendly movie. And it just makes me laugh so hard to imagine everything that he wants to say but can't. But we can't talk about the Wet Bandits without mentioning the incredible physical comedy that these actors bring to this role. And I don't have to tell you about how great the traps are and how clever they are, and the fact that it all seems very plausible that a kid could come up with this stuff, even though it is very cartoony and had to be thought out well in advance. The fact that they use household objects in these ways is just incredible. And it shows because a lot of movies that came after this tried to replicate it in some way, shape, or form, and it just doesn't work most of the time. And I think I figured out why, because it's not about the comedy or the slapstick or the pratfalls, and yeah, while those are hilarious, I think it works because it's all motivated by Kevin. This is a story about growing up, about maturing, about taking on responsibility. In the beginning of the movie, Kevin was this kid that kept looking to his big siblings or his parents for help on every little thing, and now they're all gone, so he has to do things for himself. You see him do laundry, you see him face his fears with the furnace, you see him go shopping by himself. Over the course of this movie, he becomes an 8-year-old man. He learns independence, he can take care of himself, and part of that journey, and honestly something that doesn't really get taught in a lot of children's films, is the ability to protect your home and your property. And on top of that, just being able to defend yourself. And while Kevin doesn't exactly succeed in defending the wet bandits from entering his home. He does get them in the end, and I love how the movie does this because all the while Kevin is making these very tactical retreats. He starts on the first floor, you know, he's got the doors blocked off and everything, all these traps, and as they come in, he goes upstairs, and when they go upstairs, he goes out the window to the treehouse, and when they start going to the treehouse, he cuts the cord, runs to the neighbor's house, and all the while, you're thinking, okay, Kevin's good, but he's still losing. He's still on the back foot. But ultimately, it was just to buy time to keep the crooks busy and chasing him to the neighbor's house for the cops to show up, which is a genius plan, but you know, he is still an 8-year-old kid, so it doesn't go exactly as planned. He does get caught by them, and then he needs Old Man Marley to save him. And Old Man Marley is one of those things that I guess you could cut, but the movie would lose so much because you have this old man, he's the boogeyman of the neighborhood, and Kevin learns to not judge a book by its cover. Now while that sounds cliche, getting past those childhood fears and prejudices is a big part of growing up, and it feeds into everything else Kevin has gone through in this whole journey of maturity. And that's really why we laugh so hard at all these booby traps and pratfalls, and when we see the wet bandits get hurt. It's not because we wanted to see the wet bandits get their comeuppance, because yeah, well that's part of it, we're really rooting for Kevin. We want to see Kevin get better. We want to see him improve, mature, and fend off these intruders, because that's what it means to be an adult. At the end of the day, it's the ability to take care of yourself and your family and your home in the face of any threat, and not being paralyzed by fear when that threat comes. And that's really why I think Home Alone has endured all these years. It's become a Christmas classic, even though the message doesn't exactly have to do with Christmas, but like I said earlier, there's enough parallels between Kevin's journey and someone like George Bailey or the Grinch, where they become more mature, their eyes are opened, and they see the world differently through this magical holiday that we call Christmas. And before I wrap up, I just want to give a very special thank you to all of you that's watched my Chosen Season 2 video. There was a very special announcement in that video about a project that I'm currently working on. It's called Moriah, the Lord Will Provide. It's a short film about the story of Abraham and Isaac. And if you want more details about the project, please watch that video. But also, the crowdfunding campaign to get this movie funded and get this movie made is launching today. The link is in the description down below, so please consider giving to us so that we can make this film a reality. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about Home Alone, the first one? Do you watch it every Christmas? Are you sick of seeing it everywhere? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.